Hey guys, today I'll be drafting a detailed asymmetric neckline dress with a princess bustier. So if this is your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. Let's start. So on my pattern paper, I've gone ahead to mark all my vertical measurements, which includes my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, and shoulder to waistline. So I'll go ahead to use my marker and I'm going to write it out. So the next step is to measure my shoulder divided by 2, and I'm going to be adding ½ inch because I'm attaching sleeve to the dress. So from that point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. So the reason why I'm coming down by 1 inch is to create a shoulder slant or shoulder slope for my dress. So I'll go ahead to place my ruler and I'm going to draw out the neckline this way. So after that, I'm going to mark my chest line. And to get your chest line is your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. Mine, I have 7 inches. And I'm going to go ahead to mark and draw a straight line at that 7 inches. Next, I'm going to connect my ruler and I'm going to draw connecting to that my chest line. So what I'll do right now is to divide this into 2, and 7 divided by 2, I have 3.5, and I'll be going in by ½ inch at that point. So next, what I'm going to do is just to connect from the shoulder down to that ½ inch and connect it right to the armhole. I'm just going to use a freehand sketch for this. If you have a French curve, you can also make use of your French curve. So I'll use a pencil to outline this because we are going to readjust this shoulder. So next we're going to mark out that, and to do that is your nipple to nipple divided by 2. Mine is 3.5. I'm going to mark that at the waistline and I'm going to mark that at the under bust. So going down to the bust line, I don't want the line there to be straight. I'm just going to add ½ inch to it, making it 4 inches. So what I'm going to do right now is to go ahead to connect from the bust to the under bust and down to the waistline. After doing that, we are just going to go ahead and connect whatever we have down to that armhole side. But before I do that, I'll just go ahead and come down by 1 inch at that mark also. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to place my French curve and I'm going to connect from my bust part down to that 1 inch I came down from. So after connecting, this is what I have. So there are so many methods of drafting a princess that bustier. Whatever method you are using, just make sure you achieve the desired goal. So right now is to mark the dart intake. So I'm just going to take 2 inches dart. Normally you're just going to mark 1 inch at both sides, but I'll be marking 2 inches from this side. So if you're a plus size, you can go ahead to mark 2.5. So I'll go ahead and connect that line. Next thing, at the bust point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. The reason why I'm doing this is to avoid a sharp edge at that point, and I'm going to go back and connect this to my bust point. After connecting it to my bust point, the next thing I'm going to do, from that my bust point line, I'm going to go ahead to connect it to that initial mark on top. That ½ inch we divided at the shoulder. So I was supposed to mark this earlier, but I skipped it. But we still achieved the princess that bustier. So at this point, you're just going to make sure you blend in your line to avoid sharp edge at that point. So right now, the 1 inch you took at this point, what you're going to do is you're going to replace it. And then when you're replacing it, please place your tape at the original armhole. So you're going to place your tape and you mark out 1 inch this way. So after marking in 1 inch, what you're going to do is you're going to connect this back and connect the other one upwards. But before doing that, I'll go ahead to insert my measurements. At the bust, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to go ahead to mark this 1 inch here, and I'm just going to replace it. So after doing that, I will still add my sewing allowance. I'll mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. You can go ahead to add ½ inch in case of shortage. At the under bust, I'll mark my under bust circumference divided by 4, mark the dart intake, and I'll go ahead and mark my sewing allowance. at the waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4. The dart intake, I'm going to replace it also and mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So after doing that, I'm just going to take my ruler, whatever I have at my bust, I'll extend to my chest line, take it down to my under bust, and I'll connect down to my waistline. So I'm going to take my French curve and I'll go ahead to reconnect these parts of my armhole down this way. So I'll also go ahead to connect this part of this armhole. So after connecting, this is what I have for my pattern. So what I'm going to do next is to cut out this pattern. So at this point, if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please hit on the subscribe button if you haven't yet subscribed, and give this video a thumbs up. So after cutting out, this is what my front pattern looks like. So I'll go ahead and label it as F1 meaning front 1 and F2 front 2. So right now, to alter the neckline of this dress to give the neckline at the thumbnail. So if you're wondering, we have not yet arrived at the neckline at the thumbnail. So you're going to cut out all your pattern and your lining, and you're going to stitch it before achieving that. So let's move to the back pattern. So on my back pattern, I've gone ahead to draw out or mark out my basic measurements, and I added my zipper allowance. So I used the same neckline for the front because we are still going to alter this into a mono strap dress. So next is to mark my dart, and from my zipper allowance, I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I'm going to mark it at my waist, under bust and bust line. So after doing this, I'll place my ruler and I'll go ahead to draw a straight line. After drawing a straight line, I'm going to go ahead to mark 1/2 inch, and I'm going to mark it at both sides of this pattern. What I'm going to do is to go ahead and extend it to the upper part, but before I do that, I'll go ahead and mark 1 inch lower at the bust line, and then I'll go ahead to extend my darts. So to avoid a sharp edge when I connect my princess dart for the back, I'll extend it to my chest line. And after extending that, I'm going to take my French curve and I'm going to place it at that 1/2 inch at the armhole, and I'm going to connect just like the front. So I'm going to label my pattern first as B1 meaning back 1 and B2 meaning back 2. So the next thing is to get rid of bulginess at the back of the dress. So what I'll do right now is to go down at the lower back of my dress and I'll mark 1/2 inch, and I'll go ahead to extend it upwards. So after doing that, I'll go ahead to insert my body circumference. So note, all my body measurements will start after the zipper allowance. Please don't start from the zipper allowance this way. You're just going to take your tape and you're going to shift it after the zip. And what you're going to do is to measure your bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll go ahead and I'll mark my sewing allowance. So after marking my sewing allowance, I added 1/2 inch in case I have any shortage. And then going back to my under bust, I'll mark my under bust circumference divided by 4 and mark the dart intake and mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. At the waistline, I'll mark my waist circumference, measure the dart intake, replace it, and I will mark my sewing allowance. So after doing that, I'll just go ahead to connect my pattern. So I'll connect from my under bust to my waistline, and then I'm going to go ahead to extend it to the upper part of my dress. So after doing this, the next thing I'll do is to cut out my pattern. So after cutting out the neckline, my pattern is ready for the back, and then we'll also be altering the back neckline just after we have cut our fabric and our lining. So we'll be doing that when we are actually stitching this pattern. So if you notice, if I place my pattern this way, it is actually meeting up. So I'm just going to create that neckline later. That will be when I cut out my fabric. So next we'll be drafting the skirt pattern. For the skirt pattern, I went ahead to place my tape at 17. That is your shoulder to waistline where it ended, and you're going to get your dress length. The length I'm working with is 35 inches, and I'm going to go ahead to add 2 inches. But before I do that, I'll draw a straight line marking where my skirt ends, and I'm going to measure 2 inches for folding or turn up allowance, and I'm also going to draw a straight line for that. So next I'm going to take the upper part as my waistline, and I'm going to write out waistline on it. So at the waistline point, I'm going to place my tape and I'll mark 7 inches downwards to get my hip point. So for a much taller person, you can go ahead to mark 8 inches. So I'll mark out a line indicating my hip area. After that, I'll be going over to the waistline, and I'm going to place my waist circumference divided by 4. So if you notice on my pattern, whenever I'm doing a bustier or a corset, I don't really add that to my skirt at the lower part. So after doing that, I'm just going to go ahead to add my sewing allowance. So after doing this, I'm just going to place this at the hip point, and I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to go ahead to mark 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So going down to my skirt length, depending on how fitted you want your skirt to be, whatever you have on your hip, my hip is 40 divided by 4. I have 10 plus 1.5 gives me 11.5. So to make your skirt more fitted, you're going to either minus 2 inches or 1.5 depending on what you want. So I'm going to minus 2 inches on mine, and I'm going to have 9.5 inches, and I'm going to go ahead to mark that 9.5 inches at my skirt length, and whatever I mark there, I'm going to go ahead to extend it down to the folding allowance. Next, I'm going to connect my skirt. So from the hip point, I'll just go ahead and place my French curve, and I'm going to connect from the waistline down to the hip line. So after connecting, I'll go ahead to just make a small curve before I join my skirt down. Reason why I did this is because the butt is a bit roundish, it's not straight. Next thing is to cut out my skirt pattern. After cutting this out, for my back pattern, I'll just add 2 inches or 1 inch for zipper allowance. So if you're surprised and wondering about the neckline of the dress, we'll be doing that in the stitching video, where we'll be joining our upper bodice before drafting out the neckline. So see you in our next video. Don't forget to hit on the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thanks.